Webcast Custom Instrumentation conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I will now turn today's conference over to Mr. Shrikant Narani, Senior Architect, APM Engineering Services, to begin. Please go ahead, sir.
Thanks, Lashana. Once again, welcome everybody. My name is Shrikant Narani. I'm a Senior Architect with APM Engineering Services. So today we'll be talking about custom instrumentation for CA APM. Here's the broad agenda. So basically we'll start off with why we need custom instrumentation. What's the situation where you would need to get into custom instrumentation? And basically with that, from there we'll go on to how to instrument. We'll look at some pitfalls and caveats, and then we'll go into best practices. The session is, WebEx today is expected to last for about half an hour, and then we'll open up for questions after that. You can go ahead and type in your questions in the question and answer window, and we'll take it up towards the end. All right, with that, so we'll jump into our first slide, which is basically why we need custom instrumentation. For the most part, CA APM provides you with the visibility into standard technologies and components, right? Like when you deploy your CA APM on your application servers, we basically instrument most of the components technologies out of the box, the servlets, EJBs, web services, things like that. But you could run into a situation where you have proprietary technologies like unsupported or sometimes unsupported framework. I kind of remember a long time back, I was doing a POC, I was in a POC situation where one of the customers was using proprietary single sign-on. And because it was proprietary single sign-on, we were not instrumenting it out of the box. So basically we had to do some custom instrumentation. So those are some situations where you would need custom instrumentation. Okay, so once you identify that you're not getting the visibility based on the out of the box instrumentation, and you decide to get into the custom instrumentation, what do you do? So before we actually get into how to do custom instrumentation, let's understand what are the various pieces of custom instrumentation. Basically, custom instrumentation consists of 3 parts, right? The first part is what do you want to instrument, what class or method, right? So that's the first part. And the second part is how to instrument. So what kind of metrics you want, basically. Do you want your standard 5 metrics, let's say average response time, errors per interval, responses, or execution time, so things like that. You can instrument a class and a method for various metrics, right? So that's the second part. The third part is once you instrument that, where do you want to publish that into your metric tree, right? So investigator tree. So where exactly you want that metric to show up. So those are broadly, in general, the 3 parts of custom instrumentation. And then we can get into some advanced concept of grouping and things like that. We'll look into that. But basically, overall, these are the 3 basic concepts of custom instrumentation. So let's, for example, let's take this example. So I'm saying, hey, Mr. Agent is our CA APM agent. I'm saying, Mr. Agent, please instrument the method, login method of my package, which is, mycomp single sign-on.auth. That's the package for standard 5 metrics. So for us, standard 5 metrics are basically average response time, errors per interval, responses per interval, stalls, and concurrent invocation, right? And we call it as blame point or blame metrics. And then publish them under this particular path in the resource tree, right? So you'll see it under investigator tree, new branch, a new node showing up as custom instrumentation. and basically the curly bracket basically means that replace it with class name or the method name of that particular class and method that we are instrumenting. Okay, so once you do this, what happens is as the classes are getting loaded, the agent looks at the instruction. Basically, you provide this in the form of the instruction that's coming up in the next slide, right? So it looks up the instruction and it says, hey, looks like I have to instrument, and as soon as it sees this particular package and the method, agent understands, hey, looks like I need to instrument this particular package and this particular method for these five metrics, and I have to publish them under custom instrumentation class and method, right? So it knows that because it's looking at the instruction that you have provided, right? So as soon as this particular class and method loads up, it will do the instrumentation. Okay. So let's see. Now these instructions, right, are also called as directives. So, and we provide this instruction in a particular file that's ending in .pbd. So usually, these PBD files, the directive files, they exist under the agent home core config, right? So you'll find bunch of .pbds. And basically those PBDs are based on our experience. We have PBDs for Tomcat, JBoss, and different kind of applications. So that's why we are able to instrument them out of the box, right? All right. So how do these PBDs look, right? So these PBDs have those instructions, right? So basically the instructions look like this, right? So basically this is a single simplest instruction. So it says, if there is a helper directive, I'll get into the helper directive pretty in a bit, but basically what I just talked about in the previous slide, what do you want to instrument, how do you want to instrument, and where do you want to publish the metric? These are like the basic concept, right? So I'm saying this is the class, you provide the class, a method, and then the tracer is what kind of metrics, right? Whether you want those standard 5 metrics or you want something else, right? So you provide that instruction as well. And then this resource path is nothing but your your path in the investigator tree. Okay, so these are the basic standard concept, right? 3 basic concepts. And then there are helper directive above is basically a convenient directive and can be used for grouping a set of classes. So they tell you whether you want to kind of instrument certain, you can, instead of providing a line for each and every class and package and method, right, you can group them together with the help of directives. So we'll look into some examples in the coming slide. All right, so so you provide this in the PBD, and as the classes are getting loaded, agent is going to look into read these PBD files, and it will know exactly what you want to instrument and how you want to instrument and where you want to publish. Okay, so here is an example. So the example over here translates to the one that you see in the middle, right? So basically it says the helper directive is trace one method of a class. So that's the helper directive. And then you're saying instrument this particular package, right? And this particular class using my blame point tracer. Blame point tracer is our internal tracer, which basically publishes your standard 5 metrics. So your average response time, your concurrent invocation, errors per interval, and stalls, and things like that, right? So those are the standard 5 metrics that we instrument. And then you are providing the path where it needs to be published. Okay, so that's all it is to the instrumentation. So you'll see a bunch of these instructions in our PBD file when you open them up, and all they are saying is what to instrument, how to instrument, and where to publish the metric. That's all it is. Okay, and there are some advanced concepts that we'll get into, but basically this is the broad concept from a custom instrumentation perspective. Okay, move on. Now, basically, so once you understand this basic concept of instrumentation, now let's look at some advanced instrumentation techniques, right? So I talked about the helper directive. So, they basically say, hey, instead of providing each and every class, you can group them. The example I've provided here, the ability to group classes together, we call it as tracer group, right? So what we are doing here is that, hey, I want, this is kind of an alias. When you see set flag and turn on flag, it's basically an alias, right? So I'm saying identify class as a particular class, package, and a class, right? And then I'm saying I would want this particular class and every method in that class to be referenced by this particular alias. So MVC view razor, right? So what happens is when you instrument that particular class and method, right, or all the methods of that class, all you need to do is reference it using that particular alias, right? So in this example, I'm saying instead of providing the class and method, because I have a reference, I have an alias, so I'm using that alias, right? So basically, hey, this is the alias, and this is the helper directed trace one method. So my method name is this, right? It exists in this particular class, which is referenced by this alias. And then I want those 5 standard metrics, and this is my path, okay? Now, the advantage of the alias is you can add more of these classes, like you can have more identify class as you can provide more packages here. So all of them will be referenced by those alias, right, by that alias. And that alias, you can just use that alias for that instruction instead of providing this instruction for each and every class and method. Okay. And there are quite a few other, helper directives that you can actually find over here, right? These are, and we will provide you with the recording and the link for this one. The links are also available in the last slide. So we have a complete documentation of all these directives on our documentation site. And then there are other kind of facilities that are provided in terms of custom instrumentation, where you can say, hey, although I want to instrument all these classes and method, right, but I want to skip certain classes and method too, because those classes and method I'm not interested in, or this could lead to some potential issues, and we'll discuss those in upcoming slides. So you can say I want to skip certain classes, skip certain packages, and you can provide those directives as well as, or those instructions as well as. Again, these instructions go into your .pbd file. Okay, so once you place these instructions in your PBD file, as the agent classes are getting loaded up, so you will see that these instructions are read by the agent, and during the runtime or during the execution time, it will basically instrument those classes and method for whatever metrics that you want it to be instrumented. Right? All right. So let's say you've instrumented, you custom instrumented, you provided the instructions, and you put them in .pbd. Now, how do you deploy them, right? So all you need to do is, first, obviously, the first step is to create the .pbd with the instrumentation instruction. We just saw how to do that, right? And then you have a couple of options. One is add it to your interscope.autoprobe.directive file properties. This property exists in your .profile, agent.profile, right? So you can do that. Or you can deploy it hot deploy, right? There is a hot deploy folder. You can put it in hot deploy, and that particular PBD will get picked up, right? So you obviously have, you have multiple ways of deploying these PBD files. Okay. Okay. So moving on. Okay. So custom instrumentation, once again, we do most of the instrumentation out of the box. You probably don't need to do this, but obviously we saw in certain situations, you do have to go ahead and do the instrumentation. Now, when you do custom instrumentation, there are things that you need to kind of keep an eye on, right? You cannot blindly go instrument anything and everything. So it has to be, we need to kind of make sure that it does not lead to a situation where it could potentially lead to a situation where application could kind of fall apart, right? So basically it could lead to your metric explosion and metric leak, right? And then it could also lead to overhead, agent overhead. So for example, you instrument, let's say something using, hey, I want to instrument everything that's inherited from a particular interface or a particular class, right? Then what happens is if there are lots of classes and if there are classes that show up as separate metrics, then you could potentially, it could lead to metric explosion. So you could see a whole lot of metrics showing up on the investigated tree. And that obviously potentially could lead to other issues. Right? So you have to be extremely, extremely careful on what you instrument. A situation, overhead situation could be you are trying to instrument a particular class and a method that's being called a million times, right? So basically the instrumentation itself is extremely, extremely fast, but basically we make use of the facility provided in the language called bytecode instrumentation, which is extremely fast, right? It's extremely efficient. But then obviously there is some cost associated with instrumentation. So if you instrument a class that's been called a million times, right? I'm just giving an example, but if you call a class that's being called a million times, then this could potentially cause instrumentation overhead and could, potentially lead to application falling apart, right? So you need to be extremely careful on what you instrument, right? Now, let's say you identified a gap and you instrumented using, the instructions and put it in the PBD, deployed the PBD, everything, once you deploy the PBD, you're not able to see what you were expecting to see. You're not seeing what you were expecting to see. So how do you troubleshoot, right? So there are multiple things that you can do in terms of troubleshooting. So first, obviously, make sure the particular the class and package is not skipped, right? So if you if a skip statement is used to skip the class and method somewhere else, then that particular skip in class kind of is applicable globally. So if the agent is going to look at when the classes are getting loaded and the methods are getting loaded, it's going to look at the instructions. And if there is a skip statement that exists for that particular class and method, it doesn't matter whether you instrumented it or not. It's going to skip that, right? So you have to be careful. Yeah? You have to see whether there are no skip statements for that particular class and method. Right? The other really, really good place is its auto probe log. Right? So basically, this is the log that exists in the log folder, and that basically looks at all the classes and methods that are getting loaded, and it's going to provide you with a detailed message on what's instrumented, what's not instrumented. So that's another place to look into. Okay? Make sure there are no spelling mistakes and all. Check the spelling. Make sure that there is no spelling. Again, auto probe log is a good place. You'll see towards the end that it provides a message. It's not a very descriptive message, but once you look at the auto probe log, you will know that there's something is wrong with the instrumentation. So most likely it's the spelling. Okay, and obviously the most important thing is to test in pre-production, right? Mainly not only to make sure that it's all working fine, but at the same time you want to kind of take care of be careful about the pitfalls, right, like metric explosion and overhead. Okay, so these are certain troubleshooting steps that you could take once you deploy your custom instrumentation PBD. Okay, now from a best practices perspective, right? So basically, what you would want to do is, how do you go about doing this custom instrumentation? So obviously, you need to follow certain guidelines, certain best practices, right? So what we've seen that seem to work with many customers is, first, obviously, you need to understand the business and technical needs. Why do you need custom instrumentation? Because as I said in the beginning, for the most part, we basically do out-of-the-box instrumentation. Like we take care of instrumentation out of the box. Everything shows up fine. But there could be a situation, a business or a technical need that could lead you to, hey, we need custom instrumentation. So we need to understand what those business and technical needs are. And then you basically establish an onboarding process, right? For the most organization, what we have seen is they kind of standardize on certain technologies, certain, like for example, they will have Tomcat or their .NET shop, and there are the technology that's being used are pretty similar across the application. So once you know that the organization has standardized on the application server and technology, then what we suggest is create a template, right? So when a particular application, a project is needs to be monitored, right? So then what we, based on your previous deployment, application deployment, you would know some of the things that needs to be instrumented, some of the instrumentation needs you probably already know. So why not create an instrumentation template so that you can kind of start from, you have kind of a head start on the instrumentation itself. So, create those kind of templates, establish an application onboarding process, right? So these things are extremely important, saves a lot of time. And sometimes every application is unique. So you might have certain other needs on top of what the standard templates that you've created. But that's a separate, that's a different thing. Then you get into custom instrumentation, understand the business and technical needs. But for the most part, once an application needs to be onboarded, then based on the technology, the application server and things like that being used, you probably already have, if you have created a custom instrumentation template, then you can provide that and identify if there are any further gaps, right? From the third point here is always use the tracer groups and not single class. So we saw that in the previous slide where you can create groups of your class and method for instrumentation. It's much easier when you use tracer group because they have the instructions like set flag and turn on. So if you want to kind of do some troubleshooting, or you want to see what the overhead, do some performance testing, you can just comment out the turn on flag, and it completely shuts off the instrumentation for that entire tracer group, right? If you had instruction as single class and method in the PBD, then you'll have to go and comment out each and every class and method. With tracer group, you just need to comment out the turn on flag instruction, and that's it. It takes care of the instrumentation, turning off the instrumentation for the entire tracer group. So it's generally a good practice to use the tracer group. Okay. the fourth point, I think it's self-explanatory, and you basically come up with some kind of a naming convention based on your application, what you're instrumenting. So we have lots of examples of that already in our in the deployment in the agent. So if you go to code config directory, you will see lots of .pbds, and they have been grouped together, named based on the work that they are doing. So we'll see web services.pbd or tipco.pbd or things like that, right? So take a look at them, and then obviously, come up with your own convention. The next point, can't stress enough, basically test for leak, explosion, overhead. In non-production, you'll have to test these. We've seen a number of situations where people deploy it, don't do enough testing, especially performance and load testing, and puts it in production, and things completely go wrong, right? So yeah, I can't stress enough on that point. You have to test it, test. And obviously establish a feedback mechanism throughout your delivery pipeline. And especially with the way we do instrumentation, we provide a very easy mechanism. So it's all in the text file. You can just move it around anytime, deploy it in hot deploy. It's not stored in any kind of database or anything that it's very hard to kind of extract and deploy it in different environments, your dev, your QA. So, so CA APM makes it extremely easy, extremely easy to kind of, work in a collaborative fashion, right? In passing these instrumentation, and even for that matter, your dashboards and other artifacts from one environment to another, and finally up to the production. And if you see any visibility and instrumentation gap in production, you can basically, take that information back to your dev and QA, and will plug that gap and just deploy that information or instrumentation into your production easily. So we make it really easy. So these are some of the best practices in terms of custom instrumentation. And I'm kind of, I think the next slide is probably the last one. Yeah, there you go. We are almost the bottom of the hour. So these are some of the places that you can go and learn more about custom instrumentation. CA community has lots and lots of material available, and our documentation, the APM documentation, standard documentation, provides you again with a lot of information that you can go and look into, right? So with that, we'll open it up for any questions if you guys have.
At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. And there are no audio questions at this time.
Okay, Shrikant, and I don't see any questions in the Q&A panel either. So it looks like we have a quiet group today. Let's pause for just questions just for another moment, LaShonda.
To ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone keypad.
Okay, hi everyone, this is Melissa Potson. I'm your community manager. I'm here with Melanie Giuliani, also your community manager. Shrikant, thank you for the great presentation today. Thank you everyone for joining. We have another event scheduled for you on March 8th as part of our Mini Tech webcast series. On March 8th, Gunter will be on hand to talk to you about error detection. So if you head out to the community, the APM community, you can scroll over to the right sidebar or look at the event calendar, and you'll see the many events that we have scheduled. What Shrikant delivered to you today is part of our mini webcast series, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you found it useful. So I think we can call it a wrap for today. Thank you very much for attending, and take care, everyone.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.
Thank you.